The strange thing about the new Mazda CX-5 is not that it changed, it's that Mazda changed almost everything, then priced it right next to the CX-50. The CX-5 is still the OG, it's been around longer, and it's actually one of Mazda's best-selling vehicles, even in 2025. But now, the CX-50 is coming in strong, and it's quickly become one of their top sellers too. So now you've got this weird situation where both are popular, both are good, and both cost right around the same, which makes this way harder than it should be. And trust me, you don't want to be stuck with the wrong one. So which one should you get? Well, hold on. Before we answer that question, let's start with what Mazda fixed in the new CX-5. The new CX-5's interior feels like a clear upgrade. On the top trim, it is 15.6 inches, and even the smaller screen on the lower trims is still 12.9 inches. Both have Google built in, which means Google Maps, Google Assistant, and access to apps like Spotify and Waze without relying on your phone. So if you're just sitting in the car at the dealership, the CX-5 probably wins you over fast. It feels fresh and more advanced. But here is the problem. Looking modern and being easy to live with are not the same thing. The new CX-5 moves a lot of basic controls into the screen. The climate controls are all now digital. The physical volume knob is gone. The steering wheel controls are more complicated. And that matters because these are not features you use once. You use them every single day. You adjust the temperature and volume. You try to do small things without thinking about them. And that is where the CX-50 starts to make more sense. It has the smaller screen, it has the older interface, and yes, the native Mazda menus can be annoying, but the actual controls around you are much easier to use. Real climate buttons, a real volume knob, and a steering wheel with simple physical buttons. That may not impress you in the first 5 minutes, but after 6 months, it might matter more than the screen size. And that is the weird thing about this comparison. The CX-5 looks more modern, but the CX-50 may actually feel less annoying in normal use. Now, the CX-5 does pull back some points, the front seats are more comfortable, the driving position is still excellent, and rear seat space is much better than before. Mazda added 4.5 inches to the wheelbase, and a lot of that shows up in the back seats. The CX-5 also has more headroom in the back, and when you open the cargo area, it gets even stronger. It has around 33.5 cubic feet behind the second row. With the rear seats folded, it jumps to 66 cubic feet. The CX-50 is lower at 31 cubic feet behind the rear seats and about 56 with them folded. So despite the CX-50 looking longer and wider from the outside, the CX-5 is the one with the more spacious interior space. But the cabin is not a clean win for the CX-5 because some surfaces like the doors have hard-touch plastics compared to the old CX-5, including areas like the upper door trim, and the CX-50 feels better built overall with nicer materials. So the CX-5 gives you more comfort and space, but the CX-50 gives you a better feeling cabin that is easier to operate without thinking. And that is exactly why it's hard to nail down a winner here, because the biggest advantage for the CX-50 is not some huge feature you see on the Windows sticker. It's the stuff that Mazda kept. The buttons and knobs, the easier climate controls, the simpler steering wheel, the way the car still feels built around the driver instead of built around the screen. And once you start thinking about the car that way, the driving experience becomes even more important. And this is where things get interesting, because Mazda did not just make the CX-5 bigger. The ride is quieter and more relaxing, the suspension does a better job at taking the edge off rough pavement, and on the highway, it feels more comfortable than the CX-50. If your normal driving is commuting, errands, school runs, and road trips, that matters a lot. A car that feels calm after an hour can be more valuable than a car that feels sharp for 10 minutes. And this is probably the strongest argument for the CX-5. It feels like Mazda finally accepted what most compact SUV buyers actually want: more comfort, more space, less noise, and less harshness. But then you press the gas pedal, and the whole thing gets complicated again. For 2026, the CX-5 only comes with a naturally aspirated 2.5-liter four-cylinder. It makes around 187 horsepower and 186 pound-feet of torque. But in an SUV weighing around 4,000 pounds, it's not much either. The 0 to 60 time is around 9 seconds, and even though Mazda improved the 6-speed automatic so that it feels more responsive, the engine still does not feel strong. You feel that when you merge, and you feel it when the car is loaded with people and cargo. And that is where the CX-50 throws this whole comparison sideways, because the CX-50 can still be had with the turbo. On premium fuel, it can make up to 256 horsepower and 320 pound-feet, and torque changes how a car feels in real life. It makes the car feel more relaxed when you are not trying hard, and it gives the CX-50 a sense of effortlessness that the CX-5 simply does not have. But again, there is a catch. The CX-50 is firmer, it has a torsion beam rear suspension. The CX-5 keeps the better multi-link independent rear setup, and when the road gets rough, the CX-50 can feel harsher. It is more connected, but also more tyrant. It is sharper, but it transmits more impact and more road imperfections. So the difference is clear. The CX-5 feels better when you want to relax, the CX-50 feels better when you want the car to respond. and you simply can't have both, and that is why this decision is not obvious. Now, let's talk about money, because this might be where the CX-50 comes into its own. At the low end, both start around $30,000. The CX-50 can be run from just over $31,000 to the mid-$40,000 range when fully loaded with the turbo. A Meridian trim can sit around $37,000. A loaded CX-5 Premium Plus can land around $40,000, and a CX-50 Turbo Premium Plus may only be a couple of $1,000s more. So once you get into the middle and upper trims, the question becomes uncomfortable. Are you paying for the CX-5 because it is newer, or are you paying for the CX-50's extra choices? Because the CX-5 is simpler. For now, it only has the naturally aspirated engine. A Mazda-developed hybrid is expected later, but for now, the CX-5 is a one-engine SUV. The CX-50 gives you more routes, naturally aspirated, turbo, or hybrid. And that hybrid matters because the gas versions are around 26 mpg combined, but the CX-50 hybrid can get around 38 mpg. So if fuel economy is a big part of the decision, the CX-50 has the answer today. But the CX-5 fights back with equipment and practicality. At similar money, it can give you the bigger screen, more cargo space, better rear seat room, and an available 360-degree camera. It also has the more comfortable ride. So the ownership question becomes personal. Do you want more comfort and space for the money, or do you want an engaging drive and more powerful powertrain choices? Because depending on the trim, the better value could flip, and that is exactly what keeps this from being simple. At this point, the answer may seem obvious. If you want the better everyday SUV, just get the CX-5. It is newer, roomier, quieter, more comfortable, and more useful. Done. But there is one problem. The CX-5 may be better in ways most people explain with logic. The CX-50 may be better in ways people feel every time they drive. And that is a harder thing to measure. A real volume knob is not exciting until it's gone. A turbo engine is not necessary until you try to pass on a two-lane road. And that is the final issue. The new CX-5 fixes the old CX-5's weaknesses, but in the process, it may have lost some of what made it feel different. The CX-50 keeps more of that older Mazda character, but you pay for it with less comfort, less space, and a firmer ride. So the real answer depends on what would bother you more. If you are buying for family use, long drives, comfort, and daily ease, the CX-5 makes the stronger case. It is probably the smarter choice, but smarter does not always mean more satisfying. Because if you are buying a Mazda because you still care about how a car feels, the CX-50 becomes much harder to ignore. It gives you the turbo engine, it gives you the hybrid option, it gives you the satisfying physical controls and higher quality cabin, and it still has that tighter, sharper feel that makes it stand apart from a lot of compact SUVs. But you need to be honest about the trade-offs. The CX-50 is not as comfortable, it's not as spacious, it does not have the same cargo space, and if you go too high in the trim lineup, the value can get harder to justify. So I would break it down like this. Buy the CX-5 if you want the more complete everyday SUV. But buy the CX-50 if you would regret giving up the stronger turbo engine. Buy it if you want the Mazda that still feels more connected from behind the wheel. And that is why this comparison is so strange. The new CX-5 is probably the better SUV for most people, but the CX-50 may still be the one some people enjoy living with more, because newer is not always better. So the real question is, which one would annoy you less after a year? Would you rather live with the CX-5's weaker engine and screen-heavy controls, or the CX-50's firmer ride and smaller cabin? That is the decision Mazda has created. And honestly, I don't think Mazda made the answer easy by accident. The CX-5 is for the buyer who wants to grow up, the CX-50 is for the buyer who does not want Mazda to change too much, and choosing between them tells more about who you are than it does about the cars.